Hello, everyone, and welcome to Divergent Dialogues. This is episode 11, and we're really lucky to have a special guest speaker today. Welcome, Joey. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Joey, did you want to explain to our listeners a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I suppose I come as a human with a different way of experiencing the world. So I'm neurodivergent, and part of that has been sensory differences. I work as a vestibular audiologist and neuroplasticity therapist. So I see people who come through the medical model with chronic and complex vertigo and tinnitus conditions and or hearing loss. And I myself have had vertigo and tinnitus, and it's debilitating, it's distressing, it's disorienting, and very frequently we hear things like it's incurable, there's nothing you can do, go live with it, don't worry about it. And I ended up developing a very neurodivergent, affirming, and sensitive way of being present with our sensory differences, and a way of really directing our attention and intention inwards towards the felt experience of the body, to actually look beyond the symptoms and go into the whole person and honor and hopefully develop awe and reverence for the landscape of our inner sensory life and world. So in other words, if my body is roaring at me or pulsing at me, or if I'm swimming in dizzy sensations and vertigo feelings, what could my body be asking of me? What's the wisdom in that message? And as I learn to respond to my body and really come back to that authenticity more frequently, does my body need to keep giving that signal? Probably not, because it feels listened to. And how can I learn my language and respond more often with more authentic warmth and depth?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hope out there for people with vestibular audiology conditions, because we do see a lot of healing, recovery, and reversal of persistent sensation loops.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a listen to Joey's book, Rock Steady, and I found it to be really helpful. So I don't experience tinnitus, or I don't think I really experience vertigo per se. But as an autistic person with a lot of different, sensory sensitivities, I do find that sometimes when I am really tired or I have a big sensory load, that I may have these sorts of experiences of, dizziness, particularly dizziness that I experience. So it was really helpful, your book, in seeing that there are things that you can do about this, and if you're addressing these needs, then you may not have these sorts of experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. So healing with neuroplasticity is the kind of educational approach I take. And essentially, this quote unquote symptoms, and we can talk about that, but I prefer to use the term sensation, that we might have sound sensations in the body or the head, and we may have dizziness or vertigo sensations. And so vertigo is the perception of movement when we know we're still. It's a sensory mismatch. And you can also get visual snow, spotting, dotting. So think about migraine type auras. These all fall into vestibular conditions. And the way people describe them are so vast and so varied. No two people experience vertigo or tinnitus in the same way. They're invisible, they're elusive, and essentially they are clusters of neural maps that are firing on repeat. So they are neural signals with synapses that continue to fire. It's an unresolved embodied experience. So once we learned to have a sense of loving warmth and kindness toward the bodily experience, and to give it space and to give it belonging, and to not fight, flight, freeze, or fawn from it, we create space, in fact, for an entirely new neural signal to develop. That's the neuroplasticity piece. And we can cultivate more sensations of groundedness, confidence, clarity, connection. So I teach people how to play with that inner landscape and actually shift the neural map, so to co-create new neural sensory pathways. And yes, what you're saying there about sensory loading is, when the brain is juggling a lot of sensory input, which could be vibrational movement through the vestibular organs, could be hearing, sound, that's very common, visual stimulation, so busy train stations, crowds, computer screens, even proprioceptive inputs, just feeling lost at sea, or some people actually find they feel better when they're immersed in water, like a bath. So finding our kind of sensory comforts and sensory loading limits is really important, because we can get sensory mismatch and sensory conflict, such as vertigo and tinnitus experiences, or just feeling queasy, feeling dissociated, feeling disconnected, feeling anxious. We can learn how to moderate ourselves and understand our sensory input needs.
Yeah.
And everything else can sort of become more simple once we have that information. But unfortunately, a lot of people just have no idea, and they keep trying to operate under these quote unquote neurotypical or neuronormative ways of being. And really, their brain is getting flooded with sensory inputs. And then we're getting these symptomatology.
Yeah, definitely. Teena, do you have any personal experience or with clients as well?
Definitely, like on the personal, the snow, when you're sort of in the shower and you get all those dots, it's like little fireflies. Like on one hand, it feels a bit worrisome, because it's like, oh, why am I having this visual thing? But on the other hand, like I always find it quite enjoyable, because it does look like fireflies. um, and definitely that feeling better being immersed in the bath. It's like that is my absolute haven, being in the bath. Yeah, it's interesting how when you think about these things through that different lens of like acceptance and understanding, it's no longer a medical issue to be solved. It's just it's a part of what is. Like for me, it doesn't cause a lot of distress, so I don't feel like I need to resolve that on any level. But yeah, it can be concerning when you have that mindset that, oh, I'm seeing stars, I must have some really bad neurological condition, I'm going to have to go to hospital and have brain surgery. Like, that's a scary thing to be thinking, because yeah, we have that message that things like seeing stars equals this, and for some things it does, but not always.
Yeah. And so you've brought up a couple of really interesting things. So for many of my clients, this is very debilitating. So whatever's going on for them in their inner ears, their brain, their auditory pathways, their vestibular pathways, there is what I would consider to be a lot of neurological traffic jams and a lot of confused signals, and nothing is making sense. So many of them have relationship breakdowns, employment issues, the full package of upset. It's very much the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual roller coaster. So I kind of work at that complexity end, but I think it's a really important conversation, because if we understand our sensory loading and our sensory mapping profile, we do regain a lot of control and over our autonomy and our choices and our self-responsibility. And even thinking about the sort of hierarchy of how our nervous system is responding to the world, we can do all the talk therapy and all the emotional skills and, all the amazing diets, and try and be so healthy in whatever ways we're experimenting with, all the supplements. But if we have that sensory loading issue, it's so primal, it's so at the base of how our body engages with the world.
Yeah.
If it's all the itchy tags or the bright lights or, the soundscape, whatever it is, if that's flooding us, then our executive brain can't function as well. There's all of this synaptic extra work which then dysregulates the emotions, which then can aggravate all the thoughts. And we think, oh, I've done meditated today. Why, why am I like this? And it just never ends. It's this unending maze and mystery of what's wrong with me. When if you think about it, it's so simple to moderate our sensory world. And I think about this with children, they can go to see psychologists and get all of this emotional regulation stuff when it's like they have an itchy tag. If you cut the tag off, they're fine. Or they're stimulated by crowds. If we can find a way for them to have more one-on-one time or quiet corners, they're fine. So it's that really practical space, I think, is really powerful to talk about and explore.
Yeah, and you're so right. I think the amount of times where I've had a family come to me and go, Caitlin, my child is, in the classroom, they're really struggling, they can't focus, they're getting really dysregulated. What do we do? And, I may suggest that they, get some noise reducing earbuds or headphones. And then they have that on a daily basis. Sometimes it's hard to get it over the line. Sometimes schools, some schools are kind of getting up to the um, getting to a point where they're understanding the benefits of these accommodations for children. But, they have that simple accommodation and then suddenly it's a completely different child and they're able to engage and they're happy and they're, coming home from school and they're not completely dysregulated. And yeah, we were talking in one of the previous episodes around how it's really important to understand the underlying mechanism of why some of these habits or behaviors or experiences are occurring. And sometimes it can actually be something simple and it can be sensory, overwhelm or underwhelm, particularly for, the clients that we work with.
Yeah. And, sensory underloading is another conversation I have with my Rocksteady community. So that's my community of people who are using neuroplasticity to remap. And, for people who might identify with ADHD, it could be that there is this sensory underload, that they need more music, they need more podcasts, they need more intellectual stimulation. Their brain is like roaring at them
Yeah.
for nourishment. But if we're not exposed to other people like us and other community members, we may not really know what we need. If I think I'm an ugly duckling, I never realize I'm a swan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's this whole world opens up, I think, once we look at our neurotype, as well as getting hopefully a really accurate medical assessment. And if you want, I can talk a little bit about some of the common conditions I see, such as vestibular migraine and BPPV, because they are relatively common.
Yeah.
And I think neurodivergent people really have a much harder time getting answers because of this conflict of the complexity and the intersection of, what's a sort of seemingly simple medical condition and why is it not resolving. And I think when you throw neurodivergence into the mix, it just adds layers of confusion and actually re-traumatization for the neurodivergent person.
Yeah. Yeah, we're happy to hear more about those because it might be helpful for some of our listeners who perhaps are having these experiences and they may be thinking that it's due to sensory overwhelm or underwhelm, but it might actually be one of these other conditions.
Yeah, migraines are quite common in neurodivergent folk. So yeah, please tell us more.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense too, because I think to me, I see migraines as being really an accumulation of tension and stress, whether that's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, that there's this, the body's like, I can't actually store this anymore. I need to, cocoon and retreat, and I need to integrate, digest, excrete, and rebalance myself. And I think when we experience migraines, the body is really calling the shots and forcing us into a dark room where we can recuperate. Because we become dysfunctional, we're like, oh, I'm going to vomit. So, but vestibular migraine is actually a silent migraine. So there may not be any headache. And the symptoms are random bouts of vertigo, which is this nystagmus where your eyes are moving, your eye muscles are flicking your eyes backwards and forwards. It's very, very, very scary and terrifying. There's no way you could drive a car with vertigo. But the good news is vertigo is transient and temporary. So for a vestibular migraine, the vertigo might be for 20 minutes, but then you might feel very, very nauseated, tired, and sick for 2 hours, 3 hours, or even a couple of days. So you can imagine if you have a neurodivergent person who already has a little fractured sense of mind-body connection, they may not really trust what they feel on the inside or understand their interoception because they've had a lifetime of people going, oh, don't be dramatic, don't be sensitive, stop that, shut it down. So we grow up in this sort of faking it, pushing through, pretending persona and mask. And then when the body actually starts saying, no, seriously, you have to listen to me, this is real, it just adds on all these layers of panic and unknown. Whereas I think, and really it's a huge hit to people's confidence and self-esteem and all of that. Whereas I do see some clients who will get something like vestibular migraine, put themselves to bed, take care of themselves, and really just bounce back very fluidly, that it's not a big deal. It's not a big bruise for them. And it's interesting that I think a lot of this comes down to our capacity to take care of ourselves, to trust that we understand our needs and that we can speak up and advocate for ourselves. And I can tell you, as a neurodivergent woman personally, I was trained to not do that. I was trained to not advocate, to not speak up, to really bottle it in, to, put myself in my bedroom alone and figure it out from a really young age. And so, that was how I was trained to exist in the world. So it's really a huge rewriting of the internal scripts to have that brave, courageous vulnerability to speak up, to identify our needs, and to really get that mind-body trust, because our body is our subconscious mind. The body technically is the mind.
Yeah.
The nervous system goes throughout the whole body, and learning to really receive that information, listen to it, honor it, respond to it, and then integrate more of our lived experience. So yeah, the vestibular migraine can be very, very tricky, and people are often sort of medicated and sent away rather than taken through what I would consider to be more of an unmasking process.
Yeah, I think this is something that I've experienced, and something that's very common for a lot of my clients is having a lot of these different sensory experiences or different symptoms or different sensations kind of in the body. And it's really because they have a lot of unmet needs. I can definitely speak from my own experience that, prior to, kind of going out and starting my own business, when I was, working for someone else, and, my sensory needs weren't addressed, and, it's by someone else's timeline. And I would have all of these migraines and pain and vertigo and all this stuff going on. And I'm going from doctor to doctor going, what's going on? I don't know what's happening. And one day my doctor just said, look, Caitlin, I think you're stressed. And I didn't like that answer at the time. I was like, are you kidding me? I'm having all of this stuff going on in my body. How could it just be stress? Really? Anyway, so it took a few years for me to come to the conclusion that, yes, it was stress. And it was that I had all of these needs that weren't being met. And now I'm really lucky to have the time and the space and the awareness to be able to understand my needs and to address those needs. And yeah, from time to time, I might have some of these, different symptoms. But when I experience that, instead of freaking out and making a doctor's appointment, I take that as an indicator that I need to start looking after myself better. And the more I do that, the less I have those sorts of experiences.
Yeah, as for those of you listening to the podcast, I'm on the verge of giggling as Caitlin's sharing this, because I'm remembering myself working at the University of Melbourne. It's many years ago now, and it's the same story. I was just drowning in inauthenticity and fitting the system and the hierarchy, and it wasn't suited to my neurodivergent needs. And there was times when I would actually lay under my desk to get the darkness.
Yeah.
And do Baddha Konasana yoga poses to just recharge myself. But the University of Melbourne staff kind of just took it as quirky, or that they thought I was just really into yoga. But I look back now and I was just absolutely self-medicating myself with all of these recharge skills to allow my brain to keep up with the bright lights, the air conditioning, just everything that wasn't nourishing for my nervous system.
Teena,
oh, sorry.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I think that interestingly, the description that we operate from, that what is stress? We often automatically go to things like, financial stress, things happening in our world. So to be in a a nice comfortable position, having a nice comfortable house, having a job that we've created for ourselves to meet our needs, or even being in a really good job that many people would love to have, to say that I'm stressed and I'm having all of these physiological symptoms and sensations, and I'm unwell because of stress. The In our culture, in our society, we're often then told, like, what have you got to be stressed about? And so that conditioning to, oh yes, okay, this is actually an issue of gratitude. I'm not grateful for what I have, and that's why I'm stressed, because maybe I am wanting more and I need to be grateful for what I've got, or ideas like that. We're not often guided to look at things like our sensory needs to see if that sensory environment is what's causing the stress, as opposed to the material things in life.
Yeah, and I just feel like bringing up internalized ableism,
Mm.
that we're so quick to think I'm the problem, as opposed to maybe it's the environment I'm in that is not nourishing for me. And so every single day I'm waking up and I'm essentially faced with toxins that my body and brain are having to process, digest, and excrete. And I don't just mean air pollution or chemicals or diet, but also ideas and clutter and hierarchy and all these power overstructures and kind of the roll-on effect of capitalism and patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
That you are a very sensitive neurodivergent being. We sense all of it. None of that is rolling over us. It's entering us, and our body is cringing. And there can be times when we just can't not speak up because it pushes our injustice button and we have to speak up, or else we're in pain, right?
Yep.
It's all of that. And I think it's very important that we honor our authenticity, that we do speak up. And I do a lot of work in that realm with my Rocksteady clients of, we're experiencing our inner landscape. What do we do about it? If we are experiencing a world that doesn't make sense to us and that the environment around us is, for want of a better word, toxic, not nourishing, how can we actually speak up and facilitate change? Because maybe we're the canary in the coal mine and we're the more sensitive beings in the room that are going, something here isn't right. And eventually everyone's going to feel it, but I'm feeling it first. And so really honoring that ecological role we're playing in a world that is full of broken systems. We're feeling it.
Yeah, that sounds like that was me. Again, before I went into my own private practice, where I was working. I won't name names, but I was working for a big organization that had a lot of hierarchical issues and demands and all this kind of thing. But at the time when I was having that stress, I was blaming myself. I didn't actually have a diagnosis at that point, so I had no idea from that point of view. But I'd just look around and I'd be like, everyone else is coping, well, seemingly. um, I'm really not coping. And yeah, I did feel like, I had this permanent job, well-paying job, and lots of people would have killed to have that job security. And here was me going, you know what, I'm going to take a different path and, start my own business. And people would like looking at me wide-eyed, like, okay, Caitlin. But at the end of the day, I had to radically change my life in order to meet my needs, because that workplace would have had to change so much fundamentally to be able for me to be able to safely navigate and work in that space.
Yeah, 100%. And we can go on and on, but I feel like it all comes back to authenticity and unmasking. And sometimes that does mean leaving the relationship or leaving the workplace and starting from scratch to build a new cultural environment, a new place of belonging where we can thrive, where we can feel nourished. And, you know, it's this micro evolution too. I caught up with a really dear friend the other day, and he was wearing all this strong perfume and smells, and I don't know what it was, but it was really strong. And I didn't say anything. And we were outdoors, we were by the beach, and I just kept my distance. And I love catching up with him, so I could kind of manage and put it aside. But it was very distracting for me, and it was really overwhelming. And it wasn't until I got home and thought I could still smell the fragrance on my clothes that I thought, I think the right thing to do here is to text him. So I texted and just said, just letting you know. And he's like, we have a neurodivergent understanding, and said, you know, that's quite a big sensory load for me. And, you know, not expecting you to change what you do or how you do it, but letting you know it's actually very distracting, very difficult. And we had this lovely exchange. And there's so many clunky, awkward little moments like that when we're really true to our inner world and our sensory needs. And that whole conversation of holding it lightly, that it's not my job to change how other people use perfume, but I can speak up and I can let them know how it impacts me.
Yeah.
And it was a really lovely exchange, and he was really grateful that I let him know. So I think all of these little choices and decisions are actually part of understanding what can seem like this medically complex enigma.
Yeah. And you can, oh, sorry, Tina, you go.
Yeah, I was going to say that making those changes can sometimes be really difficult, because sometimes what it takes to actually call it out and make the change is to be able to say, I don't want to put energy into making this work anymore. You know, like the job, for example, you stay at the job for a few years, and then you start realizing that it is those, you know, underpinning patriarchal attitudes and the sensory environment, and it's just too much of a big thing to make it, like, to adjust it for me. So having the ability to say, I'm not going to put my energy into showing up here anymore. Yep, it's all great, but I don't want to do that anymore, and walking away, that can be really hard to do, because again, that social expectation, or you know, that social narrative is, well, you just need to try harder. You know, here's a whole bunch of strategies to keep you going, to keep that productivity up. You know, capitalism is key. So here's some strategies so you can try harder. And being able to say, I don't want to try harder, I'm going to go somewhere else. Because then again, where the problem is like, oh, it's because you're lazy, or, you know, insert some other critical thing. But it's okay to say, I don't want to put my energy here anymore.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to reframe that when we are in our nature, and in all honesty, I had a very, very beautiful connection to my body and myself after 25 years of yoga and, you know, being quote unquote a sensory expert and all of this. I had no idea I was neurodivergent. And it was such key information to bring me home to a deeper layer of just, it felt like a cloak of shame and doubt just fell off me, because it was like, oh, now all these little things in my life make sense. It was such an important part of my self-belonging. And I think when we feel we can sit in our true nature and understand ourselves with this level of matter of factness and surrender, I think we start to learn that it's not worth it to exhaust ourselves, to fake it, to push through, to pretend. It really does drain our life force. Of course, we're going to get dizzy or have brain fog when we're doing that day in, day out on repeat. Like, it makes perfect sense from a physiological point of view when our nervous system is not able to freely flow with vitality and connection to the inner outer worlds. When we're hiding what we're really feeling and pretending we're something else, so the inner outer world has this disconnect, it's honestly exhausting, and it's not worth it. And it very likely can lead to illness and disease and some kind of somatic upset in the long term.
Yeah.
So coming back to what Teena said, I feel like we need to shift the narrative into being in our nature is joyful. There's a sense of delight and ease and flow and generative, creative giving, you know, we give back to the ecology, we speak freely, we hold our ground, and that we're not little minions in some big capitalist system doing what we're told, that there's this sense of differentiation and diversity. And, you know, ideally, and especially as entrepreneurs, we're able to schedule our lives in a way that works with our hormonal cycles and our sleeping patterns and our family commitments. So there is a sense of flow is the word that's coming to me. But when I look back to my hardest years, which was really in my 20s, and by my late 20s, I was really exhausted. And that was when I realized I had to leave the city and start rethinking how I did my career. And that really, I birthed Seeking Balance and Rocksteady from that really low place. I cocooned, I retreated, I restored. It was a beautiful, sacred experience, but it was dark and it was hard. I remember waking up with dread, like every day was like another dread. And I see that in my clients a lot, that it's like, oh my God, I have to go through this again. So I feel like we have to remind ourselves and each other that being alive is a gift and our nature is perfect. We can respect our nature no matter how it is, no matter how our brain is wired or our body is wired. We're alive. And to really be connected to our nature with awe and reverence and delight is a game changer.
Yeah.
And part of that is knowing who we are, speaking up and expressing and giving ourselves back to the world. So it's not all holding it in, somaticizing, retreating away.
Yeah, and it's so true. I think, you know, the more I'm able to be my true authentic self and the more that I'm able to meet my needs, I guess, you know, if we look at productivity, you know, there's different ways you can look at productivity, but like I think what the work that I'm doing now is so much more meaningful and impactful than the work that I used to do, because I'm regulated enough that I can really connect with people and have the space to be able to be creative and, you know, have the space to be able to try things out. And, you know, things don't always work out, but, you know, just it's a really, you know, when you have the privileges to be able to do that, it can be really impactful in your life.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to mention also on the back of what Teena said as well, is, you know, when I did come to that sort of very dark defining moment that I have to leave the city, I have to leave, like, this is not working for me at all. It was a slow transition. I didn't quit overnight. I reduced into part-time ways. I slowly moved myself from one workplace to another over a period of 1 or 2 years. You know, I took on extra further studies, and I was very nourished and nurtured as I made that transition. I think it's important people feel a sense of hope and possibility with how they might be able to become the architects of their life and redesign. And same with relationships. When people know, oh my God, my relationship isn't working, my body is telling me, it's screaming at me. You don't have to leave it overnight. It can be a process of research and really talking it through and taking those small, baby, gentle steps so it's a graceful transition. And that you're resourced and you're staying present with yourself and you're regulated as you're shifting, rather than feeling like it's that reactionary fry pan to fry pan jolt.
Yeah, I think I got to the point of burnout where I made a very quick and swift exit, but that was my choice on my terms. But I guess often what happens with a lot of the clients I work with is that they get to a point where they're so burnt out that the choice is kind of taken out of their hands, and you know, they have to leave their job because they're just to the point where they don't have the capacity to be able to get out of bed and get up and have a shower and have breakfast. And I think, you know, there's been a big shift in myself where I used to just ignore my sensory needs, because I mean, I didn't even know it was a thing.
Yeah, I need to
ignore my needs. And then I shifted over into this really super aware of it, because like when I was diagnosed, because I'm like looking out for every single symptom or thing that could possibly be going on. And now I feel like I've settled into this middle ground where it's like, yes, I'm aware, you know, I'm aware of my sensory needs, you know, I'm aware of these sensations and things that pop up in my body. It doesn't mean that I'm dying, but it, you know, it's a message to me to go, hey, Caitlin, you know, kind of trying to gently say, hey, Caitlin, you need to kind of look after yourself here. earlier. And when I don't look after myself, my body just screams louder and louder and louder. I was like, Caitlin, you need to do something about this.
Yeah, and I think that might be a good opportunity to talk about when is it a symptom and when is it a sensation. So when we feel symptoms, so classic symptoms my clients will come with are, you know, nausea and headache and migraine and vertigo and dizziness, which can be feeling like cotton wool in the head, or, you know, feeling like the ocean's in your head. And then tinnitus is any sound, whether it's ringing, pulsing, roaring, anything at all. So they come with these symptoms that they view as problems that they think they need a fix for. And when they enter my world, which I would call a complexity affirming care taking place, I invite them to leave that language to the side, to replace using the word symptom with sensation, and to welcome in every part of their sensory landscape head to toe, that all of their bodily sensations are carrying useful information, and that their bodily sensations, sounds, however they present, are little packets of information with wisdom that teach us how to live in authenticity. And so if our body is screaming at us, and if we do feel like the rug's been pulled from underneath us, how do we authentically come back into ourselves and use the body as our map, as our compass, as our lived terrain to navigate those next steps? And in each moment, we only really need that one piece of information. So I think sometimes we can feel like we're juggling so much data. But to really, I think when we body scan, which is really the core skill I use to teach people to navigate that physical, mental, emotional, spiritual layers of self, as we body scan and become really present with the whole body, head to toe, not just the ears or just the thoughts or just the feelings, but the whole package, the whole vibration, the whole pattern, things become more simple because we're really being present with what's arising one thing at a time. And I think when we shift into the language of sensation, we're entering non-bias, non-judgment, dualism, hierarchy, and we're recognizing that there actually is no problem, that this sound or this vertigo or this pain is welcome. It's an informational package of wisdom that I can decode, I can demystify, I can befriend. And we move through that mind-body Cartesian divide, and we return back into our mind-body one word, mind-body being that is all of me. And from that place of connection, I just had a client earlier today, and her response was, this is easy. I'm like, yeah, exactly. When you're in your body, it is easy. And when we're split from our body in that Cartesian divide, it's complicated. And I've got goosebumps just saying that. And I think that's the take-home message, that when we inhabit our body and come home to our body, things become easier and we're less exhausted, less symptomatic. And on all levels, things become clearer and more gentle. That would be my experience, both personally and observing it professionally as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap it up. Otherwise, Teena, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that was like, yeah, really, really well said. I'll just add on to the end, like my transition from, you know, the big corporate world into private practice, it was like a combination of both of your experiences. I was in my transition down and into private practice. I had it all planned out, meticulously working well, and then starting to listen to what my body was saying and accepting that what was happening for me was an indication that I need to act rather than just keep fighting and trying to resolve the symptoms. One day my boss had called me, and like, I don't know where it came from, I don't know how it happened, but I just found myself saying, I actually don't want to come to work anymore. How do I quit? How do I just quit completely? And it was such an awkward conversation because she was kind of like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's what I need to do. Just, should I send you an email? And it was just that moment of understanding that all of those things screaming at me in my body was, yeah, me trying to tell me, let's go over here because this is where you need to be.
Yeah, definitely.
So rich.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joey, was there anything that like you wanted to like kind of plug for yourself or your business?
Well, more just if people are listening and feeling a bit lost at sea in their bodily sensations, and if they're thinking, oh, I like the sound of listening to the wisdom of my body and I have nowhere to start, I offer educational communities and a place of belonging, and really it's a container of exploration for people to really do a deep dive into this unmasking and authenticity process, being held in that philosophy that the body is our map, the body is our compass, and the body is our lived terrain. So it's a really beautiful, kind, non-judgmental, complexity affirming space. And neurodivergent people of all walks and colors belong. It's a really diverse community.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joey. It was great to have you on this episode, and thank you for your time. It's been really great.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.